Yum, yum!
Greg here from Pixel Fondue. In this video, I'm going to showcase a number of Octane nodes that you can use to create really naturalistic and a lot of random variety in your texturing. So we can get rid of that sort of repeating texture issue, the tiling texture issue. We're going to use this on instances. We're going to use it on replicators. We're going to use it on a ground plane. And we'll use it also on, if I got this rope here, this is actually a single polygon object with different polygon islands, right? So we have different polygon islands here, and we want variation between each island. So we can have variations in texture offset and variations in color and variations to using the chaos node to take care of some tiling issues that you often run into in landscapes. And so we'll be using a bunch of different nodes in this. Random color map node, chaos node, some image adjustment nodes, composite texture node, distorted mesh UV is super useful. And what I'll do is I'll try to put some chapters down below so you can just kind of scrub around to the part that interests you the most, whether it's replicators or instances or ground planes, and then, yeah, we'll just get going. So my wife has been playing Red Dead Redemption 2, so I made sort of a nice little horse hitch here and put some ropes on it. We've got a ground plane. And I think what we'll do to start off is show the distorted mesh UV node and the random color node used in conjunction on some instances. So let me hide these ropes, and I'm going to select my little hitching post here and just activate the move tool. In Modo, if you hold shift and control at the same time in item mode, I can just make instances here. So I'm just going to make like maybe 3 or 4 instances like this. And you can see we've got a problem, like they're all textured exactly the same. So I'll move a wood sort of texture on this in a moment, but just using this sort of UV checkerboard, you can see like if we have 4 posts here, on our landscape, and they all have the exact same UV coordinates, they're going to look exactly the same, which is not what we want. So we can use something called the distorted mesh UV node and the random color node in Modo and in Octane to alleviate this. So what I'll do is I think I'm just going to open up let's go to palettes. I'm just going to open up a camera view here. And what this will do is open up a camera view palette. I can just press tilde to sort of pop this on and off. I'll just actually move it to the side. And then I'll pop open a schematic over here, and I'll turn this into an Octane viewport. So in Modo, you need an OpenGL viewport like this active the first time you initiate Octane, or it's going to screw up the smoothing normals, just so you know that. And then let's go ahead and go over to the shader tree and look at the hitching post map. And so right now I've got just this UV checker node, and like I said, we'll put these like this sort of wood texture on it in a minute. But let's start off with just the UV texture so we can see how this tiling works. And we'll just add an Octane override. So click Octane override, creates an Octane override there, creates a new workspace for us to work on our textures over here. And right now, it's just the projection is using the Modo texture locator set to UV map, right? So we don't actually want that. We're going to change that to a distorted mesh UV projection. So I'm going to unhook that. And then I'm not going to delete it. I'll keep it in the scene. I'm just going to right click and say remove node and then select projection. And over here under new projection, we're going to add a distorted mesh UV, right? So new projection and distorted mesh UV. And that's going to give us sort of a node with a bunch of subnodes here. And what this will do is it'll sort of offset, transform, like move, rotate, scale the UVs on each of the instances so we get some variation. You can see this really easily. We'll start with translation. So we've got this node plugged into translation. You can see it down here. It's just a color. Right now it's set to black, so nothing's happening. But if I hold shift and start dragging to the right and it starts getting white, you can see that it's just shifting these guys over the UV map over and all of these guys. If I go all the way to the white, it's going to go to the far end of the range, and the range is defined here, right there, translation range with this node. So the range is going to 1, like 0 to 1 UV space. If I put that to 0.5, it's going to max do like a 0.5 change. So you can adjust the range here with translation. You could just keep it to 1. I think you're fine. And then what we want to do is instead of just using a color, you want to texture these guys individually. So there's a couple ways to do this. So let me just show you kind of how this works. So I'm just going to add a noise texture just so you can kind of see what's going on. So I've just got a regular Octane noise. I'm going to unplug this white here. In fact, let's turn it back to black so it's all like our UV maps are the same, right? And I'm going to plug in this noise, and you see what's going to happen is it's super distorted, right? So it's really just sort of mangled these UV coordinates via this noise. If I select the noise here and click solo node, you can see that's the noise, and that's the effect it has on UVs. So we don't want that, although this could be useful in some cases, so that's why I wanted to show it to you. That could be useful. But what we really want to do is just get a different color for each one of these different instances. And you do that by selecting translation, new texture, and let's go to the random color node. So right here, random color texture, click that. It's plugged in, and if I solo this guy, you can see I've got a different color for each instance. And I can actually just drag this random seed, just sort of bounce around between different random colors there. So this one's, this one's pretty good. So we got sort of a medium gray here, or like a light gray, medium gray, dark gray, kind of almost white back there. And if I unsolo, you'll see like this UV map, this UV checker image has been, translated over on each one of these. It's a little bit different on each one. And I can continue to do this with the rotation range and also the rotation and also the scale. So I want to do rotation. I can just, again, I've got my rotation range. So 0 to 360, that's quite a bit. So let's just maybe set that to like 10. And I can show you how to show you this with this color again. So with rotation, let's plug our color into that and just start dragging. And you can see these rotating from 0 and 10 degrees, right? And if I set my range to 360, I can go back to this color and just shift drag. I could circle all the way around 360, right? But again, what we want to do is we just want a little rotation. So we want our range to be more like, 15 or something. And then we're going to use this same random color texture and plug that. And we can either duplicate it and do a new seed value, or we could just plug it right in to the rotation channel. And now each one of these is slightly rotated, right? So again, if I take a look at this guy in solo, this dark one is sort of near the closest to black. It's going to be the least rotation, where the one that's like the whitest is going to have the greatest rotation. You can kind of see that, right? And the one that really changes things up, in my opinion, is the scale node. So again, let's look at the scale range. That's quite a bit of range, right? So 1 to 10. And let's just plug this same random color into scale. You'll see like a fair amount of range here. Like some of these are like 10 times as big. So I don't actually want this bigger. I actually want to go smaller. So instead of going 1 to 10, let's go 0.3 to 1, something like that. You can see it's like a pretty, about a third of the size, a little bit bigger on these two, maybe even not quite as much there. So something like that. So they're different scales. And so then when I come in and I grab, let's say, this this wood texture here, let's just take a look at it in my image list, this Japanese, it's like a spruce or something. So here's my Japanese wood roughness right here, this guy right here. Or I'm sorry, Japanese wood diffuse color, and I just drag this in, and I need this little node that came with it. Just right click and remove node. Oops, where am I at? Remove nodes. So I just want the file, and if I replace the file name connector here, now I've got this wood node. And you can see it's like different between each one, right? And if I unplug this guy right here, our distorted mesh UV, it's all the same, but with distorted mesh projection, we get slight bit of variation between each of the different instances, which is what we want, right? And we just want to continue this with, the roughness and let me just remove these guys, the roughness and the normal texture. So what I can do is I can just grab all of these like this. You can just select one and Control D, duplicate. It'll duplicate that whole branch there. And then I just plug this one into roughness right here. And then I grab my roughness map, which I think is, let me just type in Japanese here. So Japanese roughness is right here. So drag this over. And I keep getting this image because they're in the shader tree, so it thinks I want that as well. But I just want the actual image file name, not the image texture layer. Plug that into roughness. You'll see the roughness change on all these guys. And then we'll do the same thing for normal. Control D, duplicate the entire branch, and plug this into normal. And then I'll just grab the normal one here, drag this in, and hook up my normal image, just like this. Now we've got some normal mapping going on. Just remove this thing. So let's add some displacement to this too, and displacement's a bit of a special case. Displacement doesn't like anything but a straight up UV map. So the distorted UV projection doesn't like that, doesn't like procedurals, doesn't like directional projections like linear or spherical. And so you need to use a texture called a baking texture. So under texture or new texture, up here near the top, you'll see, whoops, right here, baking texture, and you click that. And I'm going to click displacement. I'm going to do a new displacement as well. So new displacement, texture displacement. And you hook up the baking texture to the texture displacement, or I'm sorry, to the texture displacement. So we plug that into right there. And we just want to make sure our resolution is correct. So our texture displacement, let's go, or our displacement, let's go to 4096 by 4096. I believe our source images are 4K. And so on the baking texture, you also need to turn this to 4096 by 4096. And then we're just going to plug this entire branch again into our baking texture, and it'll bake it in real time and add our displacement. So I'm just going to select this guy right here, and I'm going to Control D duplicate and move that whole branch down here. I'm going to unhook that roughness image, and I'm going to plug this into texture. And then we're going to use our Japanese displacement image. So I think Japanese, whatever, Zelenova bark or whatever this is. So displace right here. I'm just going to drag that right in and plug this into our RGB image. And the last thing we'll do is just make sure we're using high dynamic range. This is an EXR, so we want to make sure this image is set to linear, which it is. And then also our baking texture, and maybe pop over to my Octane options again, is set to HDR. And then with displacement, we'll just bump up that displacement to like 0.01 or something. And we just go ahead and zoom in on my camera view a little bit so we can get a sort of a better look at this. Like that. And then, maybe bump up my displacement a little bit and you can see it there, right? And it's all offset as well. It's using that same offset. So it's all lined up with the colors, the diffuse color and the roughness and everything else, the normal. And so, yeah, there we go. So we've got some pretty decent variation on the textures here between each one of these. Let me just sort of kind of go like this. I'm going to try to expand this view as much as possible so you can kind of see here. So you can see there's all these textures are offset, so they're looking fairly different, but not, they could be even more different if we added a little bit of color variation. So we're going to add a little bit of color variation among these guys as well, and we can do that with an image processing node. So let's go back over here to our new texture, and let's add up, let's see here, let me just close procedure real quick. You'll see a node called image adjustment. So click that, and we get this kind of big node over here on the side. I'm just going to have to squish these down a little bit just to give ourselves some breathing room. And I'm going to move this up near the top, so we're going to plug our diffuse texture into it. So let me just unplug our diffuse texture and maneuver these guys a little bit higher. And these are going to go into the input image, all right? So our wooden Japanese bark is going to go into the input image there. And then we're going to plug this into the diffuse color texture there. And so right now that just gives us there's no adjustments being done. That just gives us what we had started with. But we're going to do some adjustments for this. So let's start off with just taking a look at what this node can do. Let me just push this up. There's a lot of different options. So, right now you can check a lot of these different image processing options on or off. Right now, the brightness adjustment is on. So if I increase brightness, it's going to increase the brightness of that texture, right? If I turn on color adjustment and then turn hue shift to 180, it's going to, shift the hue on these guys. So you can see that happening. And so what we want to do is just some slight adjustments, but we want to change it per instance again, right? So we just get a little bit of color variation. And the way you can do this is, let's turn hue shift back to 0. Let's take a look at hue first. So we got our hue shift here, and instead of just instead of using hue shift, we're actually going to do tint color. So right now, if you look, our tint color has this just white into it, so it's not tinting at anything. But if I turn this all the way to red, and I change our tint strength up to 1, you can see it's going to change all those to red. So what we want to do is do some variations with the tint color and then apply those variations, those slight variations to each one of these posts, right? So instead of doing just this red tint color, we're going to add a gradient. And so I'm going to unhook that and delete it. And under tint color, I'm going to do a new texture. And under the texture I'm going to use is a gradient 2, like that. And for the input to the gradient 2, instead of using something like slope or incidence angle, we're going to use that random color variation again. So new texture. And select random color texture, just like that. So again, if I solo this node here, like that, you can see we're getting some variations. I can just drag my random seed again. And obviously if you have 50 of these instead of 4, you're going to have, it's going to be more obvious what the variation is. But what's cool is you can map these out along a gradient. So I can edit the gradient, and I can just middle click at 100, and I can make this one sort of, we'll just do something really garish to begin with, red, and I'll make this one like green, like this, and maybe make something in the middle here like a blue, and maybe something in the middle here like an orange, like that. And so each one of these is going to be mapped out along this axis, right? So, red will be white and green will be black, kind of like that. And then if we just burn that up a little bit. So then if I unsolo the node and take a look, you can kind of see how that's mapped out here, right? And so we don't obviously want this. So what we need to do is sort of back these off a little bit. And so we'll just do like maybe some warmer tones like this, and maybe this one, maybe a slight yellowish green or something like that. And then we just take our tint amount over here and turn it down quite a bit. So instead of full like 1, let's just do like a 0.2, something like that. And you can see like there's a change in coloration here. So let me just change the angle here a little bit like this. We can see them all at once. And then if I do a sort of, let me just do a render range here like this. And if I unplug our image tint and just plug our original image back in, you can see, a little bit greener here. Let me just sort of push in a little bit. You can see like the image work we did. This one's a little bit warmer. This one's a little bit greener. This one's not a lot different. It's a little bit warmer. And so if we, so we've got some color variation now, as well as some, texture variation in terms of the scale and the translation and the rotation. And these guys are fairly different. Again, if you want to like change it up, you can just go to the random color texture node here, and I'm just dragging through the seed like this, right? You can see them all sort of changing here. And you can also add more colors along your graph and sort of maneuver these around a little bit as well to shift these colors around. And you can map it fairly precisely to what you want in terms by just sort of looking at these colors here and knowing this is on the left side of the graph and this is on the right side. So this top one will be sort of redder, and this bottom one, if you look here, will be, this top one as it's white will be sort of redder, and this bottom one here will be sort of greener, right? Let me just talk about one more node really quickly that you may find useful, and that's called the random map texture. And so I think what I'm going to do is let me select this roughness image here, and then I'm going to solo it. And so we're just looking at the roughness map on these 4 guys. And so it's offset from the distorted mesh UV we're using, but it's still the same values, right? It's still the same medium gray throughout there. Now, normally I wouldn't change this because it's all the same kind of wood, so it should have the same roughness really, unless one of them's maybe wet or older or something like that. But you can use another node. It has a similar name to the random color texture. It's called the random map node, and it's right here, random map under operator. So I can click random map, and I'm just going to plug. What I'll do is I'm going to plug my diffuse image map into the input texture, and I'm going to move the random map over into roughness. And you'll see what's going to happen is, whoops, let me get rid of my autosave here. Now, if you don't see a change with solo node active, sometimes you have to click it on and off. So it's still soloing this original diffuse, like this roughness map image. If I want to see what the random map node does, let me just unclick solo node and then re-solo. And you can see now it's just sort of changed it up, right? It was that sort of like light gray, now some darker grays. And you can change the scale here. And you can change different noise textures to, like, this is sort of how they calculate the differences in the random values. So essentially, it's going through and changing the values. It only works with black and white images. If you plug a color image into the input texture, it'll just change it black and white. So you may find a use for this random map node. I just wanted to kind of show you what it does, because I think people just don't know what it does and don't know how it's useful, and they maybe confuse it. Maybe think it can like take a bunch of random images and apply them in different places. That's not what it does. It basically just remaps the texture. So here we've got some grayscale images coming in. They look like this. And then if you plug them into this, they look like this, or depending on what noise you use, like this, or depending on what scale you use, like this. So you can get some really interesting stuff there, and it does sort of mix things up. And you may, if you have this same image applied to different textures throughout the scene, you may just use the random map node to mix things up instead of going into Photoshop and changing and getting multiple textures in there. And so it'll save you on RAM and everything like that. But it's not super useful in what we're doing here, so I'm just going to sort of bypass it like that. And let's go back to the ground plane now. All right, so there we go. I think that covers instances and using distorted mesh UV and the random color texture node. Let's move on to the ground. So if I'm just going to, I think I'm going to turn the hitching post off. In fact, why don't I just turn all of them off but one. And then on the ground, I'm going to start turning on some textures there so we can focus on the ground. So let's go over here to the ground. And yeah, so let's just turn on this diffuse color here. So there we're using this sort of, it's just a dirt texture, right? We've got some rocks, whatever. But there's some fairly recognizable, if I come over to the top of it, some pretty recognizable spots that will repeat. If you look at, for instance, let me just sort of push in, you've got these spots like here, and this is a tileable texture in here. But when I start going into texture tiling and I go to this texture locator and say put 4 and 4, it's super obvious where the tiling is, right? If we go 2 and 2, it's just super obvious where the tiling is. You know, whenever you're pulled out, it just you know, may look okay pushed in, but once you get out a certain amount, we've all seen this in games, the tiling is just all super obvious, super ugly. And there's got to be a way around that, right? And there is, and it's called the chaos texture. And we can also use some of the other things we've used up to this point as well. So let me just change this back to 1, and then I'm going to just do an Octane override with this guy with this map on. So we'll just do new Octane override. It'll create a new workspace for me with the for my ground textures here. And here we're going to use the chaos node. So let me just unplug this guy. You can keep that Moto texture locator in there if you want to. I think I'm just going to replace it with an Octane one. So just under projection, new projection, and then just mesh UV, and then for UV transform. So the Octane, the Moto texture locators are like super locators. They have so many features on there, and everything's on one locator. You can switch from UV to triplanar to spherical. You can do texture splatting with the particles option. You can do all kinds of distortion and offsetting. The Moto texture locators are awesome, and I'd love to see all of that supported in Octane natively, but right now that's just not how it works. And so I'm just going to use, Octane just separates out all the, instead of having one super projector, it has, a bunch of different projections, right? So for UV transform, we just do a new transform, and then, oops, right down here at the bottom, new transform, we just use this transform value right here, give me all this stuff, right? So this is hooked up. If I were to hook up this to the diffuse color. And if I want to say double, again, like do double the tiling, I just turn the texture transform scale to 50% and we've got that tiling, right? If I change it to 200%, it's showing a quarter of the texture, you know, half of X and Y. So there we go. But what we want to do is use the chaos node. So I'm just going to unhook it and select the diffuse channel there. And under new texture, we're going to select chaos. And I really wish, we really need a better way of adding nodes here. We need some sort of like filter, like search tab, but I don't think we can do that with forms. So there's a lot of work that Founder needs to do to integrate Octane, but that's not really what this video is about. Anyway, let's just go to chaos, which is where? Right here under mapping, chaos. Because what it does is it does a sort of new sort of mapping on it. And you want to plug in a UV mapped texture to it. So it's got a texture input there. We're just going to plug in our UV mapped texture to it. But it's got a number of different channels here. And they must have done something to speed this up because it used to take a while to calculate. But this does something a lot of things like, let's say, Substance Designer or some of those programs do, where what it's going to do is it's going to take patches of this rock texture, and it's going to kind of splat them around and then blend them together. And in fact, it's probably easier for me to just use that UV texture initially to show you how this works. So let me grab my UV grid, and then we'll just replace it with these rocks in a minute. So where's my custom UV grid? We'll just plug this, drag this guy over here, and plug it in instead of our rocks for now. So there we go. You can see there's some sort of like blending going on there. So let's adjust some of these values in the chaos texture node and kind of see what's going on. And there's actually, so there's a resolution here. So this is going to, again, remap. It's kind of like the baking node where this is doing some baking, but it's doing some splatting and blending and then baking it down. So we're going to have, keep it high res, 4096. And you can see the tile scale. And this, if I adjust this, you can see what that's doing. It's going to change the scale of our tiles here. So there we go, like that. So just a couple of patches, maybe 4 or 5 there, to a whole bunch of patches here. We'll maybe kind of keep it around 1.75. Now coverage is interesting. So if you hover over this, there are some tooltips. So basically what this is saying is if the texture is not self-tiling, you're going to want a really small number here. And what it does, I think, is it sort of like grabs some of the texture from the middle of that image so it doesn't bump into a hard tile. But if the texture is tiling, and in this case it is, then we can keep it kind of a larger image, but you can watch with the coverage what this is doing. So we'll keep it maybe like 6.6. And then there's the blending exponent. You can see what's happening when I drag this, like really soft edges, kind of hard edges. If I go this way, right, to the right, higher numbers is harder edges. You can really see what those patches are. It's sort of a hard, blend between them. But if I go back this way, it's a much softer blend, right? Now you're supposed to be able to sort of view the tile structure by clicking this. That does not appear to be working to me. I think it's supposed to show you like the patches and sort of the color view. You can kind of, like I said, you can kind of see the patches if you move this tile scale. You can see them moving around. And there's a random rotation seed in here as well. So max rotation at 360, and you can just sort of do this random rotation seed. Oops, and we want to enable rotation, right? So we've got 360 here, and then we've got a rotation seed, and then we can just reduce the rotation. You can see how this is working, right? So we're also rotating those guys, which I think is fine. We're doing a blend. You might get some harder lines in there with rotation active, but I think it's maybe if we just down it to like 45 degrees or something for max rotation, and maybe up our blending exponent or lower it just a little bit for some softer blends. So that looks pretty good. Okay, the histogram is supposed to sort of even out the shading a little bit. I don't know that you're really going to get much of that here. With this texture, with this one, it accentuates the sort of contrast. But if we plug in our rocks, our dirt texture, I think it's going to look fine. So I'm going to plug that in, and boom, right? If you look at this, and again, I'm going to do what I did before. I'm just going to do just sort of get as much room here as I can so it's viewable on YouTube. So here we've got our chaos blending going on. You can't really see any discernible, tiling. If I were to do our render region like down the middle, and then just plug in, bypass our chaos texture with just our image texture, or seamless tiling image texture, right? You'll start to see. Let me just, I'll just go ahead and do this. You'll start to see. Oh, I have to make sure there's actual tiles going on. You'll see like tiles, right? But if I plug back in our chaos texture, no tiles. And then we can sort of without fear go in here and adjust our scale of our original image and not get tiles, right? Even if we go to like 50% or 200%, however big you want to make it, that's way too big for this. But, I'm going to go with like 75, and that seems, probably okay with the rocks size there, maybe even smaller, like 60 or something like that. Looks pretty good. And so what you want to do, now that we have this on diffuse color, is we want to do this for roughness and normal. And then for displacement, we're going to have to do baking again. But it's pretty easy. Again, you just select the top of the branch, Control D to duplicate the branch. And I'm going to plug this into roughness, like that. And then I'm going to Control D one more time. And I'm going to plug this into normal. And then if you just kind of hover here, this will zoom in a little bit, plug it into normal. One of the few nice things I like about Modo Schematic. And then let's switch our images. We don't want, the albedo into both of those. We want to go over here to our images. And this is called Ground 62S. By the way, these are all from some free open, like, licensing. Is the OOC licensing, I think it's called, where you're free to distribute and free to use in your own projects. And I'll put all this on the Modo Discord, so you can download this whole thing on the Discord. This whole scene, the textures, everything, and just dissect this scene yourself. And so yeah, I'll just grab all three of these guys over here, drag them in here. Again, Modo thinks, because they exist in the shader tree, Modo thinks we also want the shader tree layer. We don't, so we'll just remove those. I don't know if that's like a feature or a bug at this point, but we'll take roughness and we'll plug this into roughness. And we'll take, this is our displacement, so we'll put this down at the bottom. We'll use that in a second. And this is our normal, so we'll plug this into our normal right here. And that's going into the normal. This chaos is going into the normal. And then we'll set up our displacement. We're going to do it the same way. We're just going to select displacement. And we'll do a new texture displacement. And I'm going to drag this guy way down just so we can sort of isolate it. And remember, we want to turn this up to 4096. And we'll turn the height to like 0.01 or so, like that. And then for the texture, I'm just going to add a baking texture before we clone our chaos branch. So new texture. And we want our baking texture right here at the top. And again, remember, we have to change that resolution in the bake as well. So we want our baking texture to bake to 4096. 4096, and we want it HDR, although I think I'm using just a PNG in this one. And then, yeah, we can just take our, let's say our roughness one here and just duplicate that whole branch with the chaos, move it down, unhook our roughness image, hook our chaos texture into the displacement, the baking texture like that. And then I'm going to plug my image map into my displacement image into the RGB. Now this could be a grayscale image. I could switch it out. That may actually save me in memory. I'm not sure, but it's not going to make much of a difference in terms of the actual result. It's just going to use those same values. And then we just sort of push in here. So go down to our angle here, and we're just going to maybe bump this up to 0.05 or something. We get some nice rocks, right? Let me see, do I have, what kind of like sky do I have going on here at the moment? I think that's fine. This is the HDR I'm happy to use. The rocks look not nearly wet or not nearly rough enough, so I kind of wonder if this roughness map, okay. That's okay, I guess. Okay, so yeah, so we just push out. Okay, so this is looking pretty good, and you can see from, let me just push it a little bit close here. So yeah, we've got, it's pretty detailed. I've got some other textures here set up as well that I did with the chaos node. So just fire them up here in the shader tree. And you can see it works really well. There's just like, there's like, you see this stick here, you just don't really see it repeated again really obviously. There's one over here, and one over here, but it's like rotated slightly. So, all those different parameters really help out. We've got some sand here that I did. It looks pretty good. And what else do I have? This sort of, these leaves, sort of this leafy forest ground like this. Let's push in for a minute. You can see it looks really good. And Octane's displacement really just looks awesome, even with something like leaves. I've got a water object in here I could put in as well. It's sort of you can kind of see it here. It's got some thickness. It's that darker blue thing, and it's got an absorption material on it, so it gets, it's not just completely transparent like glass. It actually it absorbs light as it goes through. It's sort of a brownish one, so it looks kind of real there. You can see it there. So that just adds some more, water or something like this. Just adds more sort of noise and variation to these textures and makes them look real. Now, one of the things you can do, this is all just using a chaos texture, but we can also adjust the color variation across the texture a little bit as well using some of these nodes. So why don't let me just hide the water for now and turn back on our dirt. This one, it's so nice having these in the shader tree. We could just flip them on and off. Okay, so let's look at adding some variation to this with some color. So why don't I pull out just a little bit. And I'm going to unhook my diffuse color here and just move this over to the side. And then I'm going to add a mix node. So we're going to use a mix node here to get this variation in. So new texture, and it's kind of down here near the bottom, is the mix node. Whoops, way down here. Mix. And I'm going to mix, we've got, a first texture, a second texture, and an amount. And we'll use a procedural texture in the amount to sort of blend between these. So we'll just put in this guy here on the second texture. And the first texture, I'm going to add one of those image variations. So we'll just go over here to image adjustment. So click that. And this will work kind of like last time when we did this with the post. We'll just feed our texture, our same chaos texture, into our image variation node, and then they're just sort of blending together 50-50 here. So if I go to 0, let me just actually make an adjustment in this image generation node real quick. Yeah, we'll flip on color adjustment and do like a 180 hue shift just to like see it. And then I'll turn my amount to 0. This will be the first texture, and 1 is the second texture. So let's go back to 0. So instead of hue, let's use, let's do something else, like maybe like a hue shift of like negative 15 or so, a little bit warmer, and a saturation of like 150, like that. So we've got this rocky color, and then we've got, our original one over here on 1. So this one and then this one, right? And we'll just do a little blend between them with another texture. So I will use, let me just select the amount here, and then we'll just blend between them with like a Cinema 4D procedural texture. So click C4D noise, which is right here, Cinema 4D noise. I really like this one. We need to see all of the Modo noise textures bundled up like this. So this will actually use all these different noise textures are in here, and it's basically every procedural inside the Cinema 4D. They just put it all into one node. And what we can do with Modo, I think what needs to happen with Modo's procedural textures, they need to be converted to OSL, the open shading language, and put into a node like this one so we can use it. I'm just going to solo this node so we can take a look and see exactly what we're doing with our mask here. So just click it and click solo. And you can see that's not what we want. Let's just change. It comes with the linear projection by default, which is kind of weird. So we'll just delete that. We'll just do a UV projection. So new projection, and then mesh UV. There we go. And we'll change the type of noise. You can change it to, you know, whatever you want. There's FBM, and I'm just grabbing these at random. There's a whole bunch of different stuff here. But I'm going to only just lower the scale a little bit, so it's more of like a repeating texture like that, so we can see it a little better. And I'm going to go with, actually, that's actually not bad. These Voronoi textures. Dense is also okay, just sort of blobby like that. And so we'll just do dense, and you can see with octaves we can kind of get, you know, more of these sort of blobs there or fewer. Maybe we'll do a little bit fewer like this. And you can also color correct these. You can turn on use Cinema 4D noise. You can also change this time parameter here to kind of get them, you know, move through the texture. You just want some good blobs though, something like this with some separation between them. You can also color correct this by just selecting it and adding a color correction texture in between them. So again, new texture, and you can just do, let me just collapse these guys here. I think it's called just color correction. So right here under operators, color correction. And let's say I may just want to adjust the gamma of this one. So I can, you know, dial it down or up. I'm going to invert it, first of all, and you can just make it a little more obvious there, so you can kind of see where that's going, and then you can adjust like the gamma just to sort of slowly bring these in like this. You can always go back and go over here and adjust like, you know, some of these other parameters to sort of mix it around. But you can kind of see what we're doing. We're just adding some additional variation to this texture that we've jumbled up with the chaos node, and then it doesn't quite have to be so crazy as this image adjustment node. You can turn down the saturation and hue variation a little bit, so it's not super crazy, but just something like just a little more saturated, something like that, and just a little bit warmer. And you can see that these sort of subtle variations, you see it right here, these sort of splotches of color really help out your believability in your landscape. So yeah, look good. Turn our water back on there, get some sort of blobby, splashy water. And again, this water texture, if you look at it, it's sort of a flattened cube, and it has this absorption medium on it, and I'm just absorbing this color here. And actually what it's doing is it's inverting the absorption, so it's absorbing the inverse of this color, therefore we see more of this sort of reddish pinkish color. And yeah, that's our sort of dirty water. But anyway, this looks pretty good. I think that's enough for the landscape. There's some good tools there with chaos and blending in, you know, some color corrections and varying those and things like that. Looks pretty good. So why don't we move forward? I've got a couple of plants in this scene, so let me just turn on my flowers node here. And these are replicator based, so let me just turn on these masks as well. So there's a couple of different ones. I've got these sort of green guys, and then I've got, what else? Maybe, I think it's these yellow flowers. So I've got these green guys and these yellow flowers. So what can we do to add some variation here? Because they're all just using the same images for everything, so they're all kind of the same color. So I think what I'll do is just focus on these green ones first and find a nice big chunk of these green ones. Let me turn off my water for now just to keep it a little more, maybe these guys here. So we'll just focus on all that green and see if we can get some variation in the green. And I'm going to do that by using a combination of the composite texture and some of the image adjustment attributes we have there, instead of using this image adjustment layer, and then using a random map attribute as well, or random color attribute as well. So let's go up to these guys. I think I think it's this one. Let me just double check real quick. Yeah, it's this one. So let's just create an Octane override on this guy. Sort of scooch that over. And we'll just, now Moto's, we'll just say they're, scoot these over. So if I take my diffuse color, which goes right here, map, and unplug it, these are going to turn gray. And what I'm going to do is start using a composite texture. Now I have a whole video on composite textures. You should probably watch it. The composite texture in Octane is the closest thing we have to the shader tree. It's going to give us the ability to layer things and mask between them, even like mask between entire groups of items, and also do some color corrections on a sort of a per layer or per group basis. So it's a really powerful way to texture, but it's a little bit complicated. So you should definitely watch that video I have. Let me just sort of scooch these up. Again, I'm sort of dealing with the small viewport here, and I hate it that you guys can't read these lines, so I'm pulled out a lot, but I guess I want as big of an Octane viewport as possible. So let's just start. Select the diffuse here, and we'll go over to new texture. And way down at the bottom here, you'll see composite texture. So click that, and you'll see these layers here, and you're going to think right off the top of your head that, oh, I'll just hook up my image back to layer 1, and it'll work perfectly, right? And it doesn't actually, because Octane always abstracts everything one extra level. And these layers can hold either single texture layers, which can be a texture like an image or a procedural texture, or it could also be a color correction node like a exposure or hue node. But it can also be a group. You can also have another group of textures, kind of like having a group within a group in the shader tree. And so you need to tell Octane what you're doing. So you go here to the new texture layer, and I say I want instead of a layer group, which would be kind of like a whole group of a whole stack within a stack, we're just going to go with a texture for layer 1, and that's going to be this image map we're using right here. So this is just the image map of the flowers. By the way, I'll also mention where I got all the flower images and all these flower meshes. They're free as well. They're just on a site for Blender, and I believe it's in on the Discord, the Pixel Fondue Discord, in the discussion forum. There's like a whole free texture thread, and there's links to all kinds of stuff in there. But okay, so they're all green again. This is where we started, but we're going to add another layer on top of it. And so again, you go to, instead of saying new texture, you go to new texture layer, and instead of a texture, we're going to use one of these adjustment layers, right? We've got adjust saturation and lightness and exposure and hue and all this stuff. So why don't we do a hue adjustment? We're going to try and get some more different variations of green in here. So I just have the hue adjustment, and I start shifting the hue. I'm going to get some, you have to shift it a decent amount. So we're getting some, some reds and purples there. And if I go the other direction, I can get some, some darker greens like this. And so why don't we add a couple of different layers here? So why don't we do, let's head into the negative realm a little bit. So see if I can make these a little more yellowish, and then I'm going to select my composite texture node and add another input. And then I can just select that input, and I'm going to add another texture layer, and this time I'll do saturation. And maybe I'll sort of pump up the saturation a little bit. So we'll do like 150 or so, or I don't know, yeah, 150 or so. And then I'll just add one more input. And on this last input, I'm going to do a new texture layer and do like exposure, I think, maybe exposure right here. And so I'm just going to bring up the exposure a little bit. And so this is a pretty different kind of green than we started with, right? Let me just sort of push in here. So we've got this green, and if I select all three of these guys and disable the layer, that's our original green. So that's with all those image adjustment layers, and that's with them off. So let's turn these back on, but let's also just adjust the opacity on each of these. So there's an opacity channel on every single one of these. I could turn those down or blend it in, but I want to blend it in on a per replica basis, kind of like I did on the per instance basis before. So I want one of those random color texture nodes. So I can go over here to new texture, and I want the random, not the random map, but under geometric, the random color texture. Click that. And I'm going to plug that into opacity. And then let me just do a solo node so we can kind of see what we're doing here. And here you can see some are white, some are dark gray, some are black. A lot of them are in between. And I can again adjust the random seed here. So let me just sort of get something obvious. So if I look over here, let me just sort of zoom into this area. you've got some black and some white ones kind of close to each other. Now the black ones are going to be the original dark green color, and the white ones are going to pick up that sort of lighter, more yellowy green color. I'm just going to pump this into the opacity channel of all three of these guys, like this. And then unsolo the node. And again, here, let me sort of pull back out. You can see the difference. Maybe over here it's a little more obvious, like this one, right? Very different than these. And then you can also color correct this. So again, this node is, if I solo this, let's say I just want to do like some contrast to sort of separate it out. And instead of a bunch of grays, where most of them are, let's get more blacks, more whites. So I can add let me just sort of unplug these here. And on this one, I'm going to add another color correction node. So new texture and then color correction, which I believe is under operators. So color correction, right? And then I'm just going to add a fair amount of contrast there, maybe like 10. And then unsolo this guy. And you can kind of see as I plug these back into opacity, it should just be like a more stark contrast between the sort of yellow ones and the green ones. But yeah, there's quite a bit of variation now, where before everything was just all dark green. You can see, hopefully you can see on YouTube, that there's a fair amount of variation now with these plants. In fact, why don't I go to the replicator and make the replicator base size bigger so they can just sort of see these guys a little better, maybe like 60 or so. A little bit thicker, and you can see like, there's some real obvious variations between these plant colors now. And you can add as many layers as you want. And you don't have to add a whole bunch of new image maps and suck up all your VRAM with image maps. You're just doing this color correction on a per replica basis, right? And we could do the same thing with the other ones, these sort of yellowish flowers. If I turn these guys out, so we've got these sort of yellow flowers in here now. Why don't I make these a little bit bigger as well, just so we can see them better. And if I want to adjust the yellow, I just do the same thing. I just go over to shading. And here's the mask. So I'm going to, let me see what we got here. Add an Octane override. And then let's check it out in here. We really just want to deal with this, this top one up here, right? And so again, we'll just do a composite texture. So unplug this, under diffuse, we're going to do new texture. And the key to this is just repetition. Like use these, use the composite texture a lot, just so you get used to using it and remembering like all the little extra nodes you have to put in there. So when you put in a composite texture, you have to go to texture layers and you have to define this as a group. Or let's do a group just to show you how that works. If I do a group, I have a whole new set of layers, right? So I could plug this back into the group here like this. And then, oops, I'm sorry. So the group is going to act just like another one of these. And then if I want to, then I can either plug textures into the group or I can plug color corrections into the group. So if I want to do a texture into the group, I do a new texture layer and I say texture, and that's plugged into the group. And I plug this into the input. So basically, if the textures go into inputs and these layers need a Octane texture layer node right here, or they need one of these operators or image adjustments here. So I can do again, let's just do saturation. And so I'm just going to pump up the saturation to like 200%. Some of these will look kind of orangey now. And then on the opacity, I can just again add under new texture one of the random color texture nodes. So random color texture. And if I solo that guy like this, you'll see like these black ones here, you'll see should look pretty orange, or actually pretty yellow, while the white ones should look pretty orange. So if I turn this guy off, you see the difference. And then again, like we can just, maybe we'll do a little, add another input here. And this time we'll do a new texture layer hue, and we'll just shift the hue a little bit. Not a ton, maybe like 20 or so, or negative 20, a little more reddish. And then maybe this is a little too much for the saturation. And then, whoops, 150. And then plug our same output into this opacity. And then, you can color correct these as well. So new texture, and then under operators, our color correction, and make sure that's plugged into both opacities. And then again, you could just, bump up the contrast or adjust the gamma one way that, if I want to push the gamma this way, it's going to pick up more of those corrections. If I push it this way, we're getting fewer and fewer. And so just a few of these flowers are like that. And you can layer on as many of these as you want, and you can change the random seeds of this guy to of these random color textures to like mix them around. Okay, so let me scooch this over so we can get a sort of bigger look and turn the other flowers back on here. Were they E? I can't remember. Yeah, E. And yeah, let me just pull back. And now, the flowers and the plants look just a lot, there's just a lot more variation going on in here. Turn my water back on. Now, if I was smart, I would have used some of Frederick's nodes and some of Steve Hill's nodes to create weight maps in the divots here where the water is, and then use those weight maps to control the placement of the replicator points where the plants are, so the plants just surround the water in a fully procedural setup. And maybe I'll do that in another tutorial where you can, if I want to move the water around or change the displacement on the ground, the plants will always just be around where the water is instead of just right now. It doesn't look realistic because there's plants just popping up in the middle of where the water is, which doesn't seem, unless it just recently rained or something, it doesn't seem right. So lastly, let's do the rope. And this one, we're going to be altering our variations. We're doing our variations based on a polygon islands, right? So if you look at this and just the OpenGL view, this is just one mesh item. By the way, these are fully procedural. Again, I'm using a lot of Steve Hill's different nodes to make these. You have a spiral curve. If you look at this, these spirals here, let me just sort of go into show you how this works. You see the spirals here? Those are just curves, right? So I've got these spirals, right? And so I can turn on my action transforms, which are in Steve Hill's polykit. I can rotate them. I can move them up, and I can scale them in. And then let me just turn this back on. Let me maybe turn off my flowers here just so you can see this a little bit better. I can then clone them like that, and I can use Mario Baldi's shrink wrap plugin to sort of shrink wrap them around the post there, but it has a slight offset. If I turn that to 0, they're right on there, but I put this slight offset there. So then when I go over here to my ropes, and I start with this insided, which is just this little 8-sided or 16-sided polygon here. I then sweep those around the curves. Let me just go ahead and turn these off. And then I assign a selection set for a length of, let me just go ahead and show you the selection set. So it's an edge selection set. I'm going to use this. You can kind of see that there. And use this for the procedural UV unwrapping. Also, I use Steve's make polygons with the boundary selection to put polygons on the end of the sweeped curves. And then I do the unwrapping. So if you look at this from a UV perspective, there's no UVs there. And I turn on the UV unwrapping and look at the UV map. There's my unwrapped UVs. And then I've got a material tag, and that's going to pop on my materials, which in this case right now is just this UV map right here. But we can use this again for the same way we did the post, but we're going to do a slightly different thing. Instead of using, there's no instances, there's no replicators, so there's no like ID. Like each of these polygon islands needs an ID. It would be great if every polygon island had when I say polygon island, I mean it's one mesh, but if you double click, there's 3 different polygon islands, 3 different groups of connected polygons. Now it'd be great if every polygon island had its own ID, like 0, 1, 2 built in. And it kind of does internally, but it doesn't kind of does. It absolutely does internally in Modo. Like Modo knows there's 3 polygon islands, but we need to communicate that information to Octane. And we're going to do that via weight maps. And so what we're going to do here is I'm just going to turn this to a VMap, and I'm going to do a new weight map. So I'm going to do set weight like this. And that's going to, let me just go ahead and pause Octane here. And then we're just going to call this weight map W. And then if you click select map, it'll select it. It's set it at 100% by default. If you look at the VMap here, you'll see right there, W under weight map. And what I want is a random map for each of these islands, right? A random weight variation. So what I need to do is go to the schematic. So let me actually turn the Octane viewport into a motor viewport and turn this into the schematic. And let me just jump over to my workspace here. And I'm going to drag in my set weight node, and I'm going to add a fall off operator. And what this does, it just lets me create my own fall off based on a set of parameters. So while a radial fall off is a fall off based on this sort of spherical effect, we're going to do a fall off based on some of these channels here. And so we have all these channels available to us. We have a point index and polygon part. Now part is polygon island. Now I know Modo has, this is a source of confusion, and whoever named this part needs to be punished. So Modo has a sort of selection set called a part, which is just a selection set of polygons. You can see it over here in statistics under by part right there. What this means over here in the channels part, it actually means polygon island. That's what they mean. So let's drag this channel into the schematic, and then I'm going to immediately right click and say separate channel. I just want this off on its own, so I'm going to feed it into another node, and that's a random node. So type in random, and you want the random channel under channel operator or channel modifiers. This one here, it has a if you have Warren's icon kit, which you should definitely have, he's got a nice little random like dice icon. That's the one you want, but it's under channel modifiers. That's the random one you want. You just drag it in here. And we're going to change a couple properties. One, turn off use time as seed. Also, on you have to do this to make this work. You need to make sure this selection set is set to polygon and not vertex. So you need the selection type for set weight set to polygon because we're assigning weights based on the polygon islands, right? And then we've got a random here, and we've got our polygon part. And so for the random, we're just going to drag the seed channel in there. And our polygon part's going to seed. So we have 3 parts, 0, 1, 2, and that's going to change the seed for the weight value, right? So you get a different value for each one of those. And you plug that into weight. And now these don't look super different. Again, you're just doing a random assortment between the 3, but they are in fact different. And you can just type O and turn on show weight values. And if you just go to vertices and select a point, you should be able to get, I'm gonna have to use my glasses because these are like tiny numbers, but select a 1 point, you'll see that's like a 0.36. Over here, that's like a 0.34, and that's a 0.3. So, they're all really close, but it's okay. We can remap them if you are unlucky and they all end up really close to each other. So you can add an operator and do remap weight, and then you can just tell it you want to remap weight map W, and right off the bat it inverts it, which is not really what we want. I always get annoyed that I don't know why this node automatically inverts your map, but we don't want that. So let's just turn it back to the way it was. And then instead of using the gradient to remap these, I'm going to use these inputs here. So I'm going to do input minimum. I think it was around 0.3, but we'll say 0.025. That's going to be really light. The maximum, like 0.37 or something like that. Now you can see there's a fair amount of separation between these 3. And you can also adjust. In fact, if you turn this to both, I think I can even crunch these more over here with the gradient to get more separation between them. There we go. So now there's quite a bit of separation. Again, if I put on my cheap dime store glasses, 53, I've come to the conclusion I'm probably going to need to get glasses. Now we got 0.87 and 0.66, and what is this? 0.22. So yeah, quite a bit of separation between these. The important thing is we've got a weight map that is on all 3 of these guys, and it's giving us some differentiation between these 3 polygon islands. And you can think of this kind of like the black and white colors of the random color texture node that we use, where some are black and white. So like this red one would actually be very white, and this one would be almost black, right? This would be like mid-gray. So let's take a look at how we can use that. So let's go over here to our shading, and on our rope, I think I've got some rope images. Again, I've put on here, so let's check these out. Turn off my wireframe. So we've got, the same rope on all three of these, right? Let me sort of scooch this over again. Go back to Octane here. And yeah, okay, so let's get some variation here. So I'm going to, so let's create our Octane override, boom. And then let's do our texture offsets, kind of like we did before, our UV map offsets. So we'll just come in here, instead of using this node for UV mapping, our texture, our Modo texture locator, I'm going to unhook all three of those. And instead, I'm going to connect under projection, select that. I'm going to connect, just like I did in the very first part of this tutorial, the distorted mesh UV. So new projection, distorted mesh UV. And I think I can just go ahead and pull this out like this and connect it to all three of these projections here, like that, and like this. And I can just hide these three Modo texture locators, remove nodes. And again, if I adjust this color value here, whoops, I need to actually see this in the Octane window, will not show up in the Modo OpenGL viewport. I don't know if they'll ever be able to sync those, quite frankly. But here we are in Octane. So we've got our rope textures there. All right, slight wardrobe change here as I wrap up this video. I had to come back and fix something. So we're working on these ropes, and we're going to use our weight maps to do some variations, right? So the first thing we'll do is use our weight maps to vary the UV transform, the distorted mesh UV transform between each one of these guys. But first, let's sort of fix this scale issue. So let's look at the scale range, and I just think we need to lower it to like 0.1 to 1 or so. So that's a little more. In fact, even lower than that, probably 0.05 to 0.5, something that looks more rope-like. And then let's just transform them so they're not all looking exactly the same in terms of like scale and rotation. And yeah, so we're going to use a vertex texture. So again, instead of using this color to do the translation, so if I just push in here, if I change this, you can see it sort of running along there. We just want to change this, per mesh island. So I'm going to pull out this color here, and we're going to use a vertex map. So new texture, and we're going to do the grayscale vertex attribute, and we just have to type in W. That's the weight map we made, like that, and then that's going to drive the differences between them. And you can see if I change my so I'll just sort of drag it. You can kind of see they're all offset a little bit. It may not be super obvious, but we'll do the same thing for scale. And so we've got some major different scales here, probably too much in the Y range, or the large range for scale. So on scale range, 0.05 to maybe 0.15, like that. So these are a little bit thicker, a little bit smaller, these sort of in between. Maybe not even that much between the two. There shouldn't really be that much with the rope, but something like that. So there's some differences in scale between these guys here. And we'll do the same thing with rotation. So rotation range, maybe 30 degrees, and we'll just plug in our grayscale vertex attribute to that as well. And again, like I said, oh, that's a little too much maybe. We'll just knock the scale range, or the rotation range, down to maybe like 5 or something like that. Or if it goes too much, this goes a little bit wacky over here. So if you remember, if I just bring these guys back in here and go to, just sort of isolate these guys and go to VMap mode and select that weight vertex map there, that W vertex map. Whoops, this one right here. You can see like this one is the closest to 1 or white, and so the most rotation you're going to see is on this one, and the least rotation on this one, and this one is kind of halfway in between. Same thing with the scale, the translation. So we're just using those VMaps, values to just drive the differences with the mesh distortion UV. And we're going to do the same thing with some color variation, a similar thing that we did with the posts at the beginning. So our diffuse color is right here. I'm just going to unplug it for now and sort of push it up. And we're going to run that through a image adjustment texture. So image adjustment right here. And then again, we're going to run, we're going to do a little bit of a hue change on it and map those vertex values on one axis of a gradient and put some colors in that gradient. So we'll go ahead and plug our image into the image input there. And then my big fat node will have to go up a little bit. Plug that back into diffuse color. So now we haven't done any adjustments yet, so there's no change. But if I select this guy and turn on, just sort of scooch this over a little bit, click on color adjustment like that. So that's now active. And then we'll just turn tint strength up to 1 for now, just to get some, so we can notice it happening. And again, if I turn my tint color, like let's say just all the way to red, or I guess red, not blue, you'll see what it's doing. But we're going to actually map that with a gradient. So just unplug that tint color, you can delete it, select the tint color channel, and then new texture. We're going to use gradient 2 like this. And the input to gradient 2 is going to be that vertex grayscale attribute. So I'm just going to Control D duplicate this one, and then I'm just going to sort of drag it over here, zoom in, and plug this into the input of our Octane gradient. So now on our gradient, we've got colors on one axis, and the percentages are basically the weight values, right? So this would be 100%, and this one over here would be, looking through the camera, 0%. So if I'm looking over here, let me just sort of zoom this out a little bit so we can see what we're doing. And I'm just going to middle click around 100%, and then I'm going to middle click around 50%. And so this guy, I'm going to go like a red, and then this guy, I'm going to, oops, let me just delete these two. Make sure you middle click to get a key in all RGBs. I think I just had one on red. And we'll do this one over here, sort of cyan, so you can see that. So 1 is going to be the cyan, and 0 is going to be closest to this, you know, this, it's not quite 0, but it's like 0.2 or something. So we're going to get that red, right around 20%. And then the middle we'll do like a yellowish or something like that. So pretty greenish. We'll take this guy here and maybe make it, I don't know, something. Instead of red, we'll do like an orange or something like this. And then this guy, maybe something like this. And then we can just, you know, draw that strength back a little bit. So I can go over here to my image adjust node, and our tint strength, we'll just turn that down to like 0.33 or so. And we've got some slightly different colors there, maybe 0.5. So a little bit more yellow, you know, whatever. And then we can, maybe I'll make one a little bit sort of desaturated, like older looking. Let's see. Maybe this guy will go with like, bring it in a little bit like that. This one more saturated in the middle. And then I could bring up the tint strength a little more. And so yeah, we've got some, you know, different types of looking, you know, some different shades on the ropes now and some different sizes as well. So this is just, I just wanted to show you this sort of procedure with a distorted mesh UV and using the weight maps to drive gradients for adjusting image maps. Just to, you know, with polygon islands, oftentimes, you know, you'll have meshes with a single mesh with multiple islands. They may be plants or rocks or whatever, anything condensed to a single mesh. Just using weight maps to, you know, drive variation is something that's really useful. So, all right, I'll just sort of arrange my camera a little bit. Maybe this will be the thumbnail for the video. Let's see, should I turn the water on? Sure. Let's turn on a little depth of field with our camera. So I think I'm going to, whoops. Don't want the water up that high. So yeah, let's just turn off the motofocal distance, the autofocus, turn off the moto f-stop for the aperture, and then use our little picker here to pick a focal distance, maybe the rope there or something like this. And then, yeah, change the aperture a little bit. 1.5 or so. And we'll call that a day. That's actually way too much, maybe. Here's where I start tweaking, 0.75 maybe. And yeah, so I think, we covered a lot of ground, but distorted mesh UV, chaos texture, image adjustment layer, random color texture, random map, using, a little setup to create some different weight maps on polygon islands, depending on the polygon island index, and then using that with Vertex color to drive the distorted mesh UV or some color changes via the image adjustment node on the ropes. Also using the composite texture and all those different image adjustment layers, and then using the random color texture to get different variations on our replicate flowers here. So it's a lot to get out there in one video, but I think all this stuff is important, and hopefully you guys can download some objects from Sketchfab, and I'll post the links to the texture sites, and just yeah, set up your scenes, do a little landscape, and get used to using these tools so you don't forget that they exist or forget what they do.
Yum, yum!